3,000 tanks, 8,000 armored vehicles, 1,000 artillery systems, dozens of aircraft, a flagship naval cruiser, 4 years of the most intensive land warfare Europe has seen since World War II. The conventional wisdom has been that Russia, despite staggering losses, keeps rebuilding, keeps replacing, keeps fighting. And that conventional wisdom is partially correct. Russia has rebuilt significant portions of its conventional arsenal. We covered that in a previous episode. But tonight we go deeper because there is a category of Russian military losses that is fundamentally different from tanks and artillery. A category of losses that represents not temporary battlefield attrition, but permanent, structural, irrecoverable degradation of capabilities that took decades to build and cannot be reconstructed under any realistic near-term scenario. Tonight on the Daily Latitude, we examine exactly what Russia has lost that it cannot get back, and what that means for the long-term future of Russian military power. I am your host. This is the Daily Latitude. Stay with me. Welcome back to the Daily Latitude. Tonight's analysis is built on a detailed backgrounder published by Turin Dereshov for Geopolitical Monitor on June 12, 2026. The analytical framework it introduces is one of the most useful for understanding the true long-term military impact of the Ukraine war on Russia. The framework divides Russian losses into 3 distinct categories. Category 1, losses Russia can replace. Category 2, losses Russia is sustaining without active replacement capacity. Category 3, losses that are effectively irrecoverable given Russia's current and projected industrial, technological, and personnel limitations. Most coverage of Russia's battlefield losses focuses almost entirely on Category 1. Tonight, we spend most of our time on Categories 2 and 3, because that is where the story of Russia's long-term military trajectory is actually written. And the picture that emerges is significantly more consequential than the headline tank loss numbers suggest. Let's start with the category of losses Russia can replace, because establishing this baseline is essential context for everything that follows. Russia's Uralvagonzavod defense enterprise continues producing T-90M tanks at high tempo, despite more than 110 confirmed T-90M losses in Ukraine. Production appears to be covering a substantial portion of battlefield attrition. Russia has lost more than 3,000 BMP series infantry fighting vehicles in Ukraine. It no longer produces the older BMP-1 and BMP-2 variants, but it actively manufactures the more modern BMP-3. Not a perfect replacement, but functional substitution at scale. Russia has lost multiple Su-35S multi-role fighters, yet production continues at the Komsomolsk-on-Amur aircraft plant, with new deliveries reported in early 2026. And as we covered in our previous episode on Russia's rebuilt arsenal, the Shahed-class drone production at Alabuga now exceeds 5,500 units per month at approximately $70,000 per unit. Russia's conventional arsenal, tanks, infantry vehicles, drones, cruise missiles, artillery ammunition, is being sustained and in some cases expanded. That is the category most commentary focuses on. But it is not the category that determines Russia's long-term status as a military superpower. Now let's examine the middle tier, the category of losses Russia is sustaining without currently active production lines to replace them. The T-80 tank is the clearest example. Despite being a Soviet-era platform, the T-80 has technical advantages that made it valuable on the modern battlefield, particularly its mobility and reverse speed, which matter enormously in the fluid contact warfare of Ukraine. Russia has suffered extensive T-80 losses, but serial production of the T-80 remains inactive. Restarting it would require substantial investment, industrial reorganization, and personnel recovery of specialized knowledge that has atrophied over decades of dormancy. Russia will likely substitute T-90M production rather than revive T-80 manufacturing. A functional workaround, but one that represents permanent capability degradation in specific operational contexts. The Su-25 close air support aircraft presents a similar problem, still an important battlefield platform, no longer mass-produced. No directly comparable replacement in active manufacturing. and Russia's more sophisticated electronic warfare systems, particularly the Palantir system, face potential production constraints from sanctions on the foreign microelectronics those systems depend on, 3 confirmed Palantir losses in Ukraine, very limited open source information on replacement rates, a concerning gap in a domain that has proved decisive in modern warfare. Now let's move to the analytically most significant tier, the losses that are effectively irrecoverable. And we start with what may be the single most consequential capability gap Russia now faces. It's airborne early warning and control aircraft. The A-50 AWACS. Before the war, Russia operated approximately 12 A-50 aircraft. Ukraine has destroyed at least 3 of them. That sounds like a manageable attrition rate, 25% of the fleet. But here's what makes A-50 losses categorically different from tank losses. The A-50 was originally produced not in Russia, but in Soviet Uzbekistan. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia lost direct access to the original production ecosystem, the specialized facilities, the supply chains, the institutional knowledge embedded in the workforce that built them. Russia has since focused on modernizing surviving aircraft into the upgraded A-50U variant. But when asked about restarting production of new A-50 aircraft, the Deputy General Director of Russia's United Aircraft Corporation acknowledged in late 2025 that Russia currently lacks sufficient technical and industrial resources to resume serial manufacturing. Let that sink in analytically. Russia's own defense industry leadership is publicly acknowledging they cannot rebuild this capability. Russia's future replacement, the A-100 AWACS program, is severely delayed. And the only flying testbed for that program was destroyed by Ukrainian drone strikes at Taganrog. The A-100 was already struggling with sanctions. With its testbed gone, the program's timeline extends indefinitely. Russia is losing AWACS aircraft it cannot replace. The strategic bomber situation is equally analytically alarming and significantly underreported in Western coverage of the conflict. Russia's strategic aviation rests on 3 aging Soviet-era platforms, the Tu-95 Bear, the Tu-22 M3 Backfire, and the Tu-160 Blackjack. All 3 were designed and built in the Soviet era. All 3 have been losing airframes to Ukrainian strikes and accidents, and none of them have viable near-term successors. The Tu-95, one of the core components of Russia's strategic nuclear deterrent triad, is no longer produced. Russia has lost at least 7 Tu-95 bombers since 2022. Analysts argue that restarting large-scale Tu-95 production would be extraordinarily difficult due to the collapse of Soviet-era supply chains, the disappearance of specialized industrial infrastructure. Russia's future strategic bomber, the pak-da, remains at an extremely early development stage with no confirmed operational prototypes. Its production would require immense financial and industrial investment. The Tu-22 M3 situation mirrors this pattern. Russia continues refurbishing and modernizing Soviet-produced airframes, but many so-called new additions to the fleet are in reality refurbished Soviet-era aircraft, not newly constructed platforms. Russia is maintaining the appearance of a strategic bomber fleet, while the underlying industrial capacity to regenerate that fleet has effectively ceased to exist. The Russian Navy faces structural limitations that are in some ways the most analytically irreversible of all. The sinking of the cruiser Moskva in April 2022 was more than a symbolic blow, though it was certainly that. It exposed a specific industrial vulnerability that Russia cannot resolve through investment or political will alone. Defense analyst Yuri Fedorov has argued that Russia currently lacks the shipbuilding infrastructure necessary to construct another cruiser. The reason is geographic and historical. The primary Soviet shipyard capable of producing vessels of this scale was located in Mykolaiv, which is now part of Ukraine. Russia effectively lost direct access to the industrial facilities responsible for building many of its largest warships through the collapse of the Soviet Union 3 decades ago. The war has simply made that pre-existing vulnerability operationally consequential. Recreating Mykolaiv equivalent shipbuilding capacity on Russian territory would require enormous long-term investment. There is no realistic near-term path to doing that while simultaneously funding a ground war in Ukraine, a drone production surge, and multiple other defense priorities. Russia's surface navy is degrading. The industrial capacity to regenerate it does not currently exist on Russian soil. Now let's examine the strategic choices these irrecoverable losses force on Moscow. The capabilities provided by AWACS aircraft, strategic bombers, and major naval surface combatants are not strictly necessary for a regional middle power animated digital map showing Russia's immediate border regions. Professional and clean graphic style, navy blue and charcoal theme. But Russia does not present itself as a regional middle power. It presents itself as a global military superpower, a peer competitor to the United States, a permanent member of the UN Security Council with global interests and global reach. The capabilities it is losing and cannot replace are precisely the capabilities that distinguish a global superpower from a regional power. This creates a fundamental strategic tension that Moscow will have to resolve. Option 1. Attempt to restore production of these older systems. Analytically, this is enormously expensive, industrially demanding, and likely to produce results only over a decade or more, even under optimal conditions. Option 2. Invest in entirely new replacement platforms. The pak-da, the A-100, new cruiser designs, also enormously expensive, also facing severe sanctions-driven technology constraints. Timelines measured in decades. Option 3. Accept growing dependence on China for high-end military technology. Beijing has exported advanced AWACS aircraft to Pakistan. It has the technology Russia needs. But accepting Chinese military technology at scale would represent a profound symbolic and strategic subordination. There is one more analytical thread worth examining before we close. The argument that Russia can substitute drones and long-range missiles for the strategic capabilities it is losing. It is an argument that has genuine merit, but important limits. Russia has demonstrated remarkable progress in drone development and production during this war. The Geran 2 long-range strike drone has proven effective at functions that would previously have required manned strategic aviation. Long-range precision strikes, sustained pressure on infrastructure, saturation attacks designed to overwhelm air defenses. In some operational contexts, drones are genuinely substituting for capabilities that strategic bombers previously provided. But the substitution is partial, not complete, and AWACS aircraft provides something drones currently cannot: persistent broad area surveillance, real-time command and control integration across a complex battle space, the ability to manage hundreds of simultaneous contacts across vast distances. The A-50 and its successor, the A-100, were designed to be the central nervous system of Russian air combat operations. A drone swarm, however sophisticated, cannot replicate that command and control function. A strategic bomber provides something beyond strike capacity. It provides strategic signaling, nuclear delivery capability, the ability to demonstrate global reach through presence in distant airspace. These are political and deterrent functions as much as military ones. Long-range drones send a different strategic message than to 95 bombers circling near NATO airspace. The drone substitution argument is real but limited. It can compensate for some of Russia's losses. It cannot compensate for all of them. Here is tonight's analytical bottom line. The Ukraine war has created two distinct categories of military damage to Russia that are often conflated but must be analytically separated. The first, conventional attrition. Russia has proven it can sustain and partially replace tanks, infantry vehicles, artillery, drones, cruise missiles. The rebuilt arsenal we documented in a previous episode is real. The second, high-end strategic capability losses. Russia cannot replace on any realistic near-term timeline AWACS aircraft whose production ecosystem no longer exists on Russian soil. Strategic bombers aging without successors. Naval surface combatants whose shipyards are now in Ukraine. The conflict did not create these structural weaknesses. It exposed and accelerated decay that had been worsening since the Soviet collapse in 1991. The war simply made visible what had been deteriorating invisibly for 3 decades. The long-term consequence is a Russia that can sustain attritional ground warfare, but whose claim to global superpower military status is being quietly hollowed out by irrecoverable losses in the high-end domains that actually define that status. Whether Moscow chooses to acknowledge that trajectory or continue presenting itself as a global peer competitor while its most sophisticated capabilities quietly disappear will be one of the defining strategic questions of the coming decade. That is your analytical briefing for tonight. No spin, no noise, just the analysis that matters. Subscribe, hit like, and tell me in the comments, do you think Russia can maintain its superpower military status given these irrecoverable losses? I am your host. This is the Daily Latitude. See you next episode.